The case of the missing evidence. You see, Lavina Johnson was the kind of person you make a Disney movie about because she was bright, kind, driven, and forming a loving family in Missouri. At just 19, she joined the U.S. Army and was deployed to Iraq in 2005. And then, just 8 weeks in, her family received the devastating call. Lavina had died. The official cause was a a tragic end, but the military assured her family that there was no foul play. But here's where things go full unsolved mystery meets horror movie trailer, because nothing about her death added up, and I mean nothing. First off, Lavina was found inside a tent with a gunshot wound to the head, but the gun had no fingerprints, not even hers. What is this, a ghost gun assembled by Casper? Also, the bullet entered from the wrong angle for a side, and the pistol was too long to have been fired in the way the military claimed. CSI would have shut that case down in one commercial break. Then came the photos, and, well, it was bad. Her face was bruised, her nose broken, and her teeth knocked loose. There were chemical burns on her genitals, which was possibly to destroy evidence of assault. Her family discovered these horrific details after the Army told them everything was standard procedure. Yeah, standard procedure doesn't include a cover-up starter pack. Lavina's dad, Dr. John Johnson, became the loudest voice demanding justice. He was told repeatedly that the case was closed but kept pushing. He requested files, dug through redacted reports, and even found out that investigators lost some of the evidence. Yeah, lost it, like it was a sock in a military dryer. Many believe Lavina may have been assaulted and murdered by someone within the base, and it had to be someone powerful enough to trigger a full-blown military hush-hush protocol. Despite all this damning evidence, the case is still officially ruled a suicide. There's no new trial, no new investigation, just an endless storm of unanswered questions, angry tweets, and a family that's still fighting like hell for the truth. A town hidden in plain sight. Small towns often carry a reputation for being peaceful havens where everyone knows your name and nothing ever goes wrong. But sometimes beneath that quaint facade, something far darker is lurking, and the little town of Kidwelly is the perfect example of this. So Kidwelly is a small picturesque town in Carmarthenshire, Wales, nestled between rolling hills and a historic castle. Its medieval charm attracts tourists, but in the early 2000s, this idyllic place became the setting for one of the most disturbing cults in British history, led by a man named Colin Bately. Colin Bately, a former head teacher, became the ringleader of the cult, but he wasn't some sinister figure who stood out in the crowd. In fact, he was initially seen as an upstanding member of the community, someone you wouldn't suspect of being capable of leading such a dark, exploitative group. However, under the guise of spirituality and religious enlightenment, he began to prey on vulnerable women and children. He would promise them personal salvation, but would guide them through satanic rituals. Bately, who had a history of controlling behavior, began to recruit followers, manipulating them into participating in sexually abusive rituals disguised as spiritual acts. The cult's power came from the fear and isolation they created, using satanic imagery and practices to further control their victims. Bately convinced his followers that the rituals, which involved sexual abuse and degradation, were necessary for spiritual transcendence and to please a higher power. Eventually, what began as a small, relatively unknown cult grew steadily, with Bately grooming followers by weaving a narrative of false promises. The scariest part was that the abuse wasn't limited to just one generation. This guy manipulated entire families, convincing parents to offer their children as sacrifices in order to attain spiritual rewards. Bately's role as the leader made him appear untouchable, and for years, he was able to operate in plain sight, using his status and influence to avoid suspicion. The cult's influence over its members was so powerful that many of them believed the abuse was an essential part of their religious beliefs. For years, victims remained silent out of fear of both Bately's power and the potential wrath of the supposed dark forces he claimed to serve. But in 2011, the truth finally came to light. A former member of the group, having broken free from Bately's control, came forward with evidence of the abuse. This brave act set off an investigation that uncovered the full extent of the cult's activities. By 2011, Bately and several of his followers were arrested and charged with 40 various offenses against women and young adults. The trial revealed disturbing details about the way Bately had manipulated his followers, many of whom had been vulnerable and isolated from society. The trial resulted in Bately receiving a lengthy prison sentence for his crimes, but the damage was done. The survivors of his cult, many of whom were children at the time, were left to deal with the emotional and psychological scars. To keep getting interesting, creepy stories like these, make sure you subscribe. Thank you. The Vanishing Girl. So, in the quiet town of Sunshine Hollow, they had an annual thrilling event which was the pie-eating contest. But in July 2021, something else happened that still sends shockwaves through the community. It was the sudden disappearance of 17-year-old Emily Harper. The young girl was known for her vibrant personality and love for late-night walks, but she vanished without a trace on a seemingly ordinary summer evening. Emily was last seen leaving her friend Sarah's house around 10 p.m., embarking on her usual route home after they'd attended the pie event. However, when she failed to arrive home after several hours, concern quickly escalated. Her phone was discovered on the sidewalk, still playing her favorite playlist, and her shoes were neatly placed nearby, a detail that baffled investigators and hinted at something far more sinister than a typical runaway case. Even though the local authorities launched an extensive search, leads were very scarce. Rumors swirled about a mysterious figure seen lurking near the woods, and some residents reported hearing unfamiliar sounds during the night. Some believe she was the victim of a clandestine abduction, possibly linked to a series of unsolved cases in neighboring towns. Others whispered about supernatural elements, citing the town's history of unexplained occurrences and eerie folklore. Sadly, despite numerous interviews and community efforts, Emily's case grew cold, leaving behind a trail of unanswered questions and a town gripped by fear. Time skips. If you're ever road tripping through northwest Montana and stumble across a little forest-wrapped dot called Eldridge, consider keeping your engine running. On the surface, it's your average blink-and-you'll-miss-it town, but according to dozens of accounts, the town's defining feature isn't its charm, but the fact that time literally disappears here. Let's rewind to May 14th, 1997, back when people still used payphones and frosted tips were a thing. Officer Dan Walters, a sheriff's deputy from the nearby town of Red Hawk, responded to a call about weird noises coming from the woods near Eldridge. Body cam footage, which was surprisingly modern for 97, showed him entering the tree line around 2:17 p.m. Here's where it gets weird. He walked out 4 days later, beard grown, confused, and asking why his pager wouldn't stop buzzing. The footage was literally static after 2:23 p.m. His watch was frozen at 2:19. He remembered nothing, not even lunch. Again in March 8, 2009, John Caro, a 42-year-old truck driver from Oregon, decided to take a detour into Eldridge to get gas and sit for a bit. He parked by the town square, sat on a wooden bench outside of Eldridge Bakery, and cracked into a baguette. When he stood up, it was August. Not only had his truck accumulated 3 parking tickets, but his hair had grown significantly. He even had a tan line from sunglasses he didn't wear. The bakery's camera showed him sitting still for 5 months, unmoving like someone hit pause on his entire life. It gets weirder because there were rumors that in the old Eldridge Library, which was condemned since 1974, a massive grandfather clock inside still rings inexplicably at 3:33 a.m. every full moon. People staying in town even overnight report hearing it, even from motels 2 miles out. Every time it rings, someone reports lost time. In one eerie case from 2015, a woman named Tasha Nguyen said she heard the bell while staying with friends nearby. She woke up in her car 40 miles south with no recollection of ever leaving. Some people think this weird situation happens because Eldridge sits on a fault in time, where the laws of reality do the cha-cha slide. Others believe there's an underground bunker nearby experimenting with chronal manipulation. Ghosts on the force. It started with whispers. Literally, dispatchers began hearing voices on the radio, static-laced murmurs in a language nobody could identify. Then came the cold spots, you know, those eerie chills that creep up your spine even when the thermostat says it's 72 degrees and cozy. Yeah, that kind of energy. Then one night in 2016, Officer Greg was doing his late-night rounds at the station when he heard footsteps in the hallway. Now, most people would just not investigate because horror movies have taught us something, but Greg was a brave officer, so he followed the sound. Alone, with a body cam on. Greg rounds the corner, and there he spots a woman in white, barefoot, faceless, and looking like she walked straight out of a 19th century seance. And before Greg can even say, "Ma'am, this is a restricted area," she phases right through a brick wall like she's glitching out of a PlayStation 2 game. Greg stands frozen, however his body cam has captured exactly what happened. He turned it in that night, came back the next morning, and realized that the footage had mysteriously vanished from the department's archives. The scariest part is that this wasn't just some spooky house, but was the police station. The place you run to when stuff hits the fan. But what happens when the station itself is haunted? When the people trained to protect you are hiding from whatever creeps through their walls at 2:47 a.m.? Well, that's bad. Eventually, cops started to quit after a few more people encountered the ghost. One detective started bringing a Bible and sage to every shift like he was preparing for an exorcism between paperwork. Dispatchers refused night duty, and even the police chief, who once laughed off the ghost stories, resigned without a word, packed up, and moved 3 states away. No goodbye party, no exit interview, just straight up ghosted. The Crying Bride of Boone. Boone, Iowa is a town so unassuming that nothing weird ever happens there. But yet, there are stories that it's allegedly haunted by a ghost. The legend centers around a mysterious bride who is seen walking along the town's train tracks. Not just walking, but she's also full-on sobbing and crying. Like every good ghost story, the details are foggy, contradictory, and suspiciously juicy. Some say she died in a tragic accident on her wedding day, run over by a train while trying to elope. Others whisper she took her own life after a cheating fiancé was exposed. There's also a rogue theory that she's a manifestation of collective sadness. What we do know is that locals have passed this story down for decades. Generations of Boone residents have heard about her. Some say she only appears at midnight. Others claim it has to be a full moon or after prom. Now here's where it gets scary. Multiple people claim to have actually seen her. She's often described as wearing a torn white wedding dress, her veil covering a pale, sorrowful face. Witnesses report hearing sobs echo across the tracks, loud enough to stop you in your tracks. But then she always disappears before anyone can get close, either into the woods or into thin air. If that wasn't creepy enough, phones often glitch near the site. Batteries die, the air gets freezing cold in a matter of seconds. One guy named Kevin from TikTok went to the town and claimed his car wouldn't start after trying to film there. Another claimed his footage got corrupted and everything got spooky real fast. The weirdest thing about this ghost story is that Boone residents are very aware of the legend, but there's a weird quietness about it. When asked, many locals give the same answer: "We just don't go down there at night," which is basically a small town code for, "Yes, this is a curse, please don't summon her again." Some folks have gone full Ghostbusters and tried to investigate. EVP recorders, motion cams, the works. Most leave with nothing but goosebumps and a story, but every so often someone comes back with a chilling photo, a faint white figure in the mist, or a woman-shaped shadow that wasn't there 5 seconds before, or, best case, just a really convincing smudge. Fatal plane crash. You know those peaceful, breezy English mornings where everything smells like tea and sheep? Yeah, this was not one of those. On April 8th, 2025, what started as a calm day at the Darley Moor racetrack in Derbyshire took a sharp turn for the tragic and downright terrifying. At around 11:30 a.m., emergency services were alerted to the scene of a crash just near the edge of the wooded area by the track. Eyewitnesses reported a small plane making a rapid descent followed by a loud impact. The aircraft was believed to be a glider or light aircraft, definitely not built for drama. Unfortunately, it delivered a tragic final act. Two men were aboard, Edward Brown, 66, and James Litchfield, 64, and both were declared dead at the scene. No chance of a rescue, no mayday, no miraculous last-minute pull-up. And yes, I know, light aircraft crash doesn't sound all that creepy, but here's the strange part about their deaths. Now, of course, after an accident like this, emergency crews flooded the scene. Fire engines came from Ashbourne, Wirksworth, Nottingham Road, Staveley, and even Uttoxeter. Meanwhile, the Air Accidents Investigation Branch, AAIB, rolled in like the CSI of the skies. They taped off the area, launched drones, took debris samples, and basically took over the entire investigation. To keep the skies calm, and possibly to keep conspiracy theorists from sending drones, a flight restriction was immediately implemented over Darley Moor. There were no planes allowed under 1,600 feet unless you had police permission. Despite the investigation, the exact cause of the crash still hasn't been released. Witnesses said the plane seemed to be flying fine until it wasn't. In fact, there were no distress calls, no warning signs, just a swift, silent nosedive. What's even more heartbreaking and strange is that Edward Brown and James Litchfield weren't daredevils. They were experienced, seasoned aviation lovers. If two experienced pilots can't avoid disaster in a clear sky, what did go wrong? Investigators asked for dashcam footage from anyone traveling on the nearby A515 between 11:20 and 11:40 a.m., hoping someone saw something, but to date, the cause remains unsolved and unexplainable. The Hollow Temple Below. Gravestone Hollow first appeared in mining records in the late 1800s, and it was a booming coal town with an unusually high population for such a remote area. But by 1914, it vanished from official records entirely. I'm talking about the buildings being abandoned, residents unaccounted for, and no explanation given. Some claim a mine collapse wiped out the population. Others whisper about a fire, but there are no photos, no documents, and no confirmed survivor accounts. Which is exactly why, in October of 1996, a group of amateur filmmakers decided it was the perfect place to explore. Led by 23-year-old Eric Halstead, the group of five entered Gravestone Hollow armed with flashlights, a handheld camcorder, and just enough horror movie confidence to ignore every red flag. They filmed crumbling shacks, mining carts rusted in place, and eerily intact homes with tables still set, as if the people had simply vanished mid-dinner. Then they found the mine. Half covered by vines and debris, it was a gaping black hole in the earth that was completely open. But as soon as they entered inside, things got strange fast. The air temperature dropped instantly. Their audio picked up low frequencies not audible in the moment. As they went deeper in, they found carvings, symbols none of them could identify, arranged around a stone structure in what looked like a subterranean temple. At the center was a pit, wide and bottomless. The group never came back. But in the spring of 1997, a hiker named Melissa Rains stumbled upon their abandoned campsite. Backpacks untouched, campfire ash cold, the camcorder was partially buried, water damaged, but salvageable. The footage was rough. Flickering lights, panicked breathing, distorted voices. One clear frame showed something humanoid but wrong. Long limbs bent the wrong way, standing near the pit. Eric is heard screaming before the camera goes black. Authorities dismissed the tape as doctored. Melissa still insists it was real. Plus, in his final journal entry, Eric, word for word, wrote that the place was never just a mine, because there was something down there and it had been waiting. That was the last thing he ever wrote. Yeah, definitely creepy. Even now, hikers who go looking for it report missing time, sudden nausea, electronic failures, and, in one case, vanishing completely for 2 days before reappearing in a neighboring county, dazed and dehydrated with no memory of what happened. No one can agree where the mine is now. Some say the mountain moves it, burying it beneath landslides or trees. Others believe it's the temple itself that shifts, like it's alive and hiding.